namda zurun seja sajin den pamir lengul Shiran yede nawa chuguza tujun jogan sonla chola jaza lo jogan jizi sonwe bajin le sambo jube chush ingundam gewe yabdo chush janges na singe jeme lo so rikam sabe minro tambe su emne lamche lo jemach deshin kushin jo teze pe yangze lamman chupa chela Nankada nyambe simji tamje shedun do tochilan mega yanda po zobi sanji shi kumbaran buche
Please listen with the following motivation to this teaching today, generating the heart of awakening bodhicitta, aspiring to do all that is in your power, to put all your efforts in achieving Buddhahood so that you can be of benefit to all sentient beings who are as vast in number as space, have all been our mothers. So with this, please generate bodhicitta and listen to these teachings with this motivation.
Kazan sabje bardo yewala ni chungbarwa dinane ngondo ki te kazan son senne tangweshi ani chiosumgi lamde tembare din sadane ngweshi chiosumgi lamde mashugi dine mashe.
We are looking at this text that we have seen describes as well the preliminary practices for a bodhisattva, as well as the actual part of the bodhisattva path and the practices that belong to it. We have seen that we are in the part of the text that is the so-called actual text, the intermediate part of the composition, which is said to be the virtuous middle, compared to the virtuous beginning, where we had the introductory verses, and then compared to the virtuous conclusion. And we are at the point where we have concluded yesterday the preliminary practices for then the actual part of the bodhisattva practice, where we are right now, which is showing the path, pointing out the path based on the three types of beings, of individuals.
Tende kazan yeki jamdru ki kola doduji shure ra te kazan jamdru te ranya korwe tsundre chingwa yin se ne tsiji chikde te jamdru korde ma robs ma shube yin ne chida jamdru ki simji ina ya tela ya
Yesterday, we already saw a little brief introduction on Refuge, but there are for sure many more ways how we can talk about this. And one way to explain Refuge is based on the three levels connected to the three types of individuals.
Tada jamdo seju te chetana sa nangba ke kola chubi kapso tani yul sanje che tina shinge chuj ni dro kendo la ya chap song di machine ta tembe ki chungo rawa chi te jamdo chagi yore rawa yana ya ani tikpa chenpo 되게 산삼다고데 되니서 심지라 라레 되게요.
Within Buddhism, as you know, we speak about refuge. It is not something that is unique to Buddhism, but within Buddhism, refuge has particular aspects. It includes taking refuge to the Buddha. It includes taking refuge to the Dharma, the teachings of the Buddha, and to the friends on the path, that is the noble Sangha. So in Buddhism, it is really said that refuge to the three jewels, that is the entry point into the whole path. The whole path starts with taking refuge. And then if we ask, okay, so where is the so-called border between a general Buddhist practitioner and a Mahayana Buddhist practitioner? So there then we can say that the line that really marks the doorway into the Mahayana path is not only taking refuge, but also then cultivating and generating bodhicitta, the mind or the heart of awakening. Yes.
라서 디네다 디나라 다다 지오른바 숨긴 남샤 데 디네 직제 숨기 땡겨러와 디나네 당부때 다 지오 중요기 심지게 돈이시 아마 땡겨래 되게 직제데 데러와 신도 속인에서 동하나 데빌레지 저 투베서 대지 솔로 버전 데빌레 남의 메지 캐슬라리니 시에트
So then within the path, the Buddha, the path that was taught and shown by the Buddha, then one can speak about three types of individuals with different sort of interests and capacities. And these three types of individuals will now be shortly explained or pointed out by the next three verses. So the so-called individual with little capacities is what is pointed out in verse 8. So we are going to read verse 8. So this verse refers to the mind of awakening of an individual with little capacities. So I'm going to read the verse. The Buddha taught that the suffering of the lower realms, so hard to endure, is the outcome of unwholesome actions. Therefore, never committing a harmful act, even on pain of death. This is what bodhisattvas do.
다디 주 중요하게 심지되라 마 대샤버나 드네 다디 조보 제 상지지 공방 통도게 삼바 싸워도 때 동하당 되게 주 된절라 때네 그래서 원해서 타워에 탐지진 배 공방 통도게 삼바직 남중 하나 주시던데 기스 봐라 된데게 기업한테 다 디지털도 잖아 주 중요하게 심지지 작아요리
So what kind of Dharma mind or mind of awakening does an individual with little capacities develop? So it is the following, that such an individual generates the wish to achieve Buddhahood and liberation because they have recognized that samsara is a place of suffering, and they have recognized that there are certain causes to that suffering, and looking at that, recognizing that, then they generate the wish to achieve liberation or Buddhahood. So this is the so-called mind of awakening of an individual with little capacities. Yes.
네. 지단데 식제대로와 주 중요하게 식제대 초직내 된데 맞대 연두 대법 멤버게 심지다도 잖아요. 다시 조초부터 오지 요래. 그 가에서는 조 가에서는 조 동안 라니 동안 면도 받아. 라니 타워도 베게 쳐도 되니 다 심기 라스번 기아 전도 대파트인데 때인데 대법 멤버게 소로 요르때 얘는 다 가서 봐봐대 디 가슨 랄랭게 다 sob드마게 나 최대유디 다 티바 침보지 인고 여러 냠는데 디 티바 침보 인건데 땅 알아서 심지 탐지게 쳐도 심지 되기게 요르데 얘나야 제 삼노 자체 좀 땅땅 되게 돈이 쳐버지 얘한테가 소야 티바 침보 인로야 삼노 땅 초땅 된속에 돈이 쳐버린 거를 되게 돈이 마셔야 그래.
Lasso. when we hear this, then that might remind us of the motivation of a practitioner of the Hinayana, of the lower vehicle, because the practitioners of the Hinayana, the lower vehicle, they aspire to mainly achieve liberation for themselves so that they can get free from suffering mainly for themselves. But we are here reading a text that belongs to the Mahayana and therefore to the path of a bodhisattva. So here, these words are still talking about a Mahayana practitioner, but we should see them as describing still the largeness of aspiration within the mind of a practitioner. So there can be these differences on how vast the mindset and of how large the heart of awakening truly is. So we should look at it that way.
Tati tata chivu sumgi rinpegi negapsu, tini chivu chungyo ki simchi tang, chivu chingbu ki simchi tang, chivu chimbu ki simchi, tata nenga dhawu te kharizla thudu warasa na ti ngoy shingu ya ye shimbu shirare. Simchi, tanga ranzu simchi ji tangba ina, ti simchi tangba te, tini tikpa chimbu ki simchi chagi duda mendu, kasi tikpa chimbu ki simchi nanga chogu yo na, ti kanti chik tola chogu tosini samata ayandu, ti tikpa memba, ani kasa tikpa memba mara simchi chungwa ta, simchi chungwa ta, ani simchi chiawa, ta dendreki susu ki takchi jine, tini ngonshin bache, ngonshin sayo jela, ti simchi di yarche tango ya dendre jare.
When we talk about these three types of individuals, so we're talking about three types of different kinds of mindset, of aspirations, and capacity to generate the heart of awakening. So here we are really talking within the context of the Mahayana. So we talk about the so-called bodhicitta, or mind and heart of awakening of an individual with less capacities, or with little capacities, than of the individual with middling capacities, and then with for the individual with great capacities. So here, what is really the key point in this is that listening and hearing that there are these three types of different inclinations towards how we can practice the Dharma or motivate ourselves towards the Dharma, they are helpful for us to recognize, to assess, okay, in which section am I? Where do I belong? And when I recognize that, then that also makes me aware that I can improve and grow what I have right now, that I then put my efforts into expanding the mind of awakening and growing it further and further. That's
Dire. Tati jeta jeta mancha ngarang tsu taba dunyin jingi kansa tati ringa mancha ke samla tangcho tawate. Tani tata ngarang tsu chivu chungyo ke lamki rinpal tata kiasi lani ana sumba tardu tende toni yungu yorwa. Te kandre sena ta ngarang tsu misete nyingbo meba tende ta nyingbo meba tiyang ko rinpa shindu tambu soso la tewa chung di je la ni soso ke samba nashin madruba che ni samba nashin madrub du dini soso ki metse de nyingbo mepa tong di rimshi rangi metse nyingbo mepa tong di shen che korwa da korwa se nanda da ganda tse tegi che sanye da tenzo tsangma da tende te ta kumitabi rangshin to churbi rangshin to tela ten de so nyingbo ki ma thon tu ta tela chik lo do yung go re tin lo do yung de so tin tambi chu ki ta sanji ke song la ti shine chik kan so re chu ten to ten bai ten de do ke na wa shar che de rimbe sanji ke chu la de ba shu che la to te tin chik simji ki ya ten so ngana so ta ti ngana so thumo la ten de yung gu yo ro 제가 지금 나라. 근데 덴데도 마한치한테 다다 대포 충격이 심지게 데려다 버지 수에서나 다 덴데로.
So actually most of the people or individuals who aspire towards liberation, they are part of this kind of type of practitioner, of this type of individual, because this is something that very often happens to us, that we live, we want to be happy, but then step by step, gradually, we recognize that things are not exactly, how we want them to be. So, for example, we strive towards achieving a certain kind of happiness, a certain kind of really feeling of well-being and real joy in this life, and then we try to achieve that, and then we see that the way how we thought it should be or how we wanted it to be does not exactly manifest, and then we start to see that perhaps there is this life is not exactly what I thought it to be, or it cannot exactly give me what I was looking for. So we start to feel and sense that this life does not carry that kind of essence where I can say, okay, this is really what can bring me joy. So we start to see that there is a lack of meaning in that kind of sense in this life, and then we start slowly um, to also look around us and see our surroundings, and we start to see, oh, things are impermanent, they are changing all the time, there is nothing that really stays the same. And then so we not only recognize towards our own personal lives that there is no lasting meaning in this world that where I can hold on to, then we see it also in the outside world, that there is nothing really that can give me a lasting sense of meaning, or something that will last, give me a lasting sense that I have something that I'm looking for. So then we start to slowly turn the mind away from the world, and we start to look at the teachings of the Buddha, for instance. And then we see, oh, perhaps there is truth in what we have heard, in what we have learned, what the Buddha said. And then the more we see and compare the teachings with the actual life situation, then we start to see that the Buddha was actually conveying a lot of truth. And then again, we have more and more faith in what the Buddha said, and it grows and grows more and more. So then that is something that actually happens to many of us, and probably has happened to all of us. So this kind of motivation that then we generate to obtain so-called liberation, that is the intention of a being with little capacities, where I can say the heart of awakening of an individual with little capacity also.
배나 차츠바이나 지즈메레게 남사로 다샤바이나 지우 숨게 림바텔라 지샤바이나 샤촉 전나 자투바도 지요레 이나 딘나네 조 가스 마쇼레 지우 침벽이 심지 이나야 지 남사로 바테바이나 야 델라 지가 자나야 자투바도 지요레 가야스나 주즈메레 고세 때 라 드니 야 멜라시라 견세 공부존에 드니 아쿠당 아니니게 독부당데서 드니 독부당에 동아 데 인지주 멜라랑 마세 에아 당 아니세 세모 코나마니 던줄라야 동안요 데든 동안요인데 드니 디베게레 공기다 툴라소가 클럽네트니 투든스마 잠나로가 디 잡사요 쇼라 드니 간다 추 진이 코란스 마신이 베데 추추 주대지기 롱바지인데 간다 추싱에데 다 딕바 개와단 딕바 딘데지 달소 첨부 용비게 롱바인데 다 소소기 딕바 슈첨부 사이어 바니 제라 딘데 삼노콜 텔라야 조와 타부키 드니 라마 짠나로 라마 나네 마블 호타와 짠네 타와다 탐지 심베 콤바 두벨라 소데 용바레 대야다 소고 다오데 니 코란게 니중기 삼바 소 코란게 미게ዌ 레든 줄라야 제샤보다 니 고세 되게나 동안용데 버튼 줄라 데네데니 코란 탐도게 타바 톤도게 로촌이 템버와 다 덴데로 배샤나야 지가나서 지고 렘바이나 레라오도 지힘고래.
So one easy example for what was just mentioned, this kind of heart of awakening or mind of awakening of an individual with little capacities, can even be found in the life story of Milarepa. If we look at the life story of Milarepa, then we can actually see gradually the presence on his own path of all three kinds of bodhicittas, of heart of awakenings, that he started off with the bodhicitta of the capacity that is less, and then he would evolve and go through all three stages. And of course, in general, Milarepa is seen as an individual practitioner who can still see in his life story that he went through all of these three stages, so to say. And how can we see that? So if we look at Milarepa's life, then we know that at the beginning of his life, his father, Mila Sherab Gyaltsen, died. And when he died, Milarepa, together with his mother and his sister, were taken into the house of his uncle and aunt. And they were very cruel or unkind towards all three of them, and made them suffer a great deal, not only Milarepa, but also his sister and his mother. So they experienced a lot of hardship and suffering in that time. And then Milarepa, to take revenge on his family, we know that the story goes that he went to learn the art of magic, how he could use magic so he could take revenge, and then he actually did great harm through the power of magic. And because Tibet, already by the time of Milarepa, was a country where the Buddha Dharma was practiced and widely spread, there was the concept of virtue and negative actions, so of wholesome actions and negative actions. So then at some point, Milarepa realized that what he had actually committed was something extremely negative, and he generated remorse towards what he did. And that's not only remorse, but also a sort of turning away from samsara. And then that's where he searched for a lama, for a guru who could teach him and path to liberation, and he found Marpa. And that is because, so he generated the wish to obtain liberation because of the negative karma that he had accumulated, and because he had witnessed himself how much suffering he experienced and how much suffering there was. So he generated the wish to obtain liberation because of that reality. Plus.
Tene ngaranzo nyamlen ambe kapso thoma thega tene jiu chimbuki rimba tenzola juba inaya kabre chap tab deo yo mare roa de tambo ngaranzo jiu chungyo ki lamla ya changne tene de yabu cha sona tene de chira jiu tengi nyamle tene thama jiu chimbuki lamla tene ji ji lo jaya la sopa jongsona tene chida yabu yore.
And that is actually a very good gradual process that is very helpful, because it might be very difficult to just straight jump into the Buddha Dharma and straight into the path or practice and mind of a greater individual with great capacities within the Mahayana. That would actually not be very skillful even. So it is very good to first start gradually to train in the mind of awakening of a being with little capacities, and then progress on the path towards the mind of awakening of a being with middle capacities and then with great capacities.
Teacher, tene ta nipa teacher, jiu tengi simchi teacher. Tela tene 세섬 대화 자지 수바신 요즘 시기 집이 주진이 남야 메주 탈배 공방초 된도냐바 갸슬라네 인스 아디 지우 땡기 심지 대지
And then we proceed with the next verse, which is verse number 9, which is the verse that points out the bodhicitta of an being with middling capacities. We will read the verse, whatever happiness the three realms afford. It is like a drop of dew on the tip of a grass blade. It exists only for fleeting moments and quickly vanishes. Seeking the supreme state of liberation that never changes, this is what bodhisattvas do.
다 대가서 지우 충격이 심지되나 지우 땡기 심진 얘기 빨라 쳐봐 가려 용스나 당보 지우 충격이 값서 사회 동하라 저다 동하라 때네 때네 심지 기야지당 다 지우 땡기 값서 소 사회대 산지지 공방도도 니야지 산지지 공방도도 니야 저 대가랑라 산지 다 산지기 연된다 다 된데라 때네 예 공방도도 니야 저지라 당보대 동할 저지 니바대 공방도 저도 니게
So we might wonder, okay, what's the difference between the aspiration, the mind of awakening of a being with little capacities and of one with middle capacities? What's the difference? So the difference is that a being with little capacities wants to obtain liberation mainly because they are looking at the suffering in samsara, and then they want to therefore obtain liberation because they are mainly directing their focus towards, recognizing that they're suffering. So they recognize they're suffering, so they want to get free from that suffering. And then a being with middle capacities does actually look at the qualities of Buddhahood. What are the qualities that come along with obtaining full awakening, and therefore then that motivates them to obtain that. So it's a different focus that creates the motivation to attain awakening. That's all.
다디 초진에 가는 차들서 동할 세주대 제다 내가 게 주르에 다니 지로와 근데 내가 게 동할 차들이요 타와다 탐지 쳔바테 동하라 섬노 땅바이나 내가 말해 그 유릉부기 내수직 차들이요 드니 대연대가 없어 아니 다당하나서 동하대 주르에 다니인데 대 동하대 섬노 땅다대 주르와대 그 두수 통동 마도 유릉부 직대 샤야대 갈리 가부 직 차우요 대연도 델라 대연대가 없어 드니 동하대 직 주르송와이나 드니 타와다 섬지 진비 공방 기야 저때 또 로컬에 가부 연구요 대연도 시iten서 동하대 아니 두수 요 통동직 된데라고 제가 섬노 땅바이나 드니 또 제발 어디 가서 하고 또 그래 타와다 탐지 진비 공방 쓰지 때 드니 그나 내갑다 타와 샹당 카시기 계적이 말에 타와다 탐지 진비 공마지 토서위 슈굴라 드니 코와 다 코와도 주다 지구 탐지 다 매바스 사오라 때 유릉부지 차기요 denzola samno tangba ina yas ti yul korangi toni chechung rogi chepa yore.
And if we look at these two different points of focus that then can lead to the aspiration of attaining liberation and Buddhahood, then there actually is quite a big difference, because for the individual, that mainly generates the wish to obtain liberation and the state of Buddhahood, they look at mainly at suffering. And suffering is something that's momentarily, that comes from moment to moment, then it changes again. So it's part of this whole game of happening, then it stops from happening, then it transforms. So that means that also it's more difficult to obtain liberation with this kind of focus, because suffering might even transform into joy in the next moment, and then maybe we lose focus again, that we even want to get free from samsara. Instead, if we look at the qualities of liberation and Buddhahood, then there's something really lasting. There can be a lasting motivation and really strong, lasting interest that can generate to attain that. Because once we achieve liberation and Buddhahood, this is not something temporary. It's not temporary. It is something that once we have obtained it, the samsara and the causes of samsara are eliminated. So that's a very different kind of approach.
내가 초진에 나한테 선물지 땅we나 나한테 미치기 메시로 올라 선물 땅으로 미치기 메시 때 지 변화 미들라 파마메 버지 답투인 버지 강의 쉬고요 버지 대인데 강의 최사 총사 상만이 강의 숙심보여 버지 대양 고난라 지 메시에나 야시라 제 나와 지부터 시라 금보시 다 데이터 미들라 초와 숙심보 연구여로 초와데 시라 숙심보 연구 되니 다 대인데 쿠란게 당부 탑시에 갈 땅으로서나 다 데이터에게 초와 도부대 마용하게 탑시단 거예요. 가야스나 딩무스뇽은 되게 여러. 니바 되게 가지고서나 초 도부대 삼지 매버스네 다지 약사 톱사 딜라 두니에 지요. 대인데 다들 강사 되게 다 동화 매버스 바단지 약사 톱아 니가 다른 내가 그 동화대 매버스에게 레테 이나 조에게 림바도들 양 쳐버 연구도와 근데 양 쳐버 연구.
So one example is given now, which is that let's take a person, for example, that has no parents, maybe, so therefore that's an orphan. And that individual encounters a lot of difficulties. Some are great difficulties, some are little difficulties. However, let's say the life is full of struggles and hardship. And therefore, one can say that the life of this orphan is not a very good life. It's not a very happy life. Maybe happiness is even quite rare in the life of this person. And there are very, very strong feelings, of course, towards how life is going for this individual. And therefore, then, what does the person try? First, it will try to remove suffering from their lives, or to try to eliminate it as much as they can. And once then that has gone better, then they will also try to actually achieve something better, to make it improve. So these two kinds of focuses, one to eliminate the suffering and one to really improve, are two different kinds of efforts and two different kinds of points of focus. One can say two different stages within a process. Lasso?
말한서 동화대 매버 서버 좀 따대도 여기 집어들 동화 매버 좀지 매버 차선 보이나 안티니 매버지 서버터 보이나 티 강한 차르스나 티네 동화 매버 좀리 셴게요 말이 티 강사들라 티 지우 등게 타버 등인지 로지 매서 보이나 다지 지우 다다로 차스면은 제 대화 tum두게 지 여러 미율로데 소소게 내갑게 동화대 쪽보데 매버 수사회 쇼골라 뒤쪽보로 섬을 땅 사회나 뒤지에서나 뜨니 그런 대단한 소리.
Rehakusu.
대인도 가지 미유지요 사회 쇼를 요라 그 동화된 내가 서버이나 무튼에 조사지 요때 버리. 또 딘데인도 딘데 좀전에 대인도 지우 땡게 심지데 도스 다기라 섬을 자치기요.
The first part of the process of this individual was, I want to remove my suffering. I want to get rid of my hardship and my suffering. So then imagine that individual manages to remove the suffering that they are experiencing. And then what next? There was no aim. Then they have basically arrived where they wanted to land, and then that's it. But if you have a focus that goes beyond that, then it means that there is somewhere once you have reached that where you can continuously go towards. And that is a little bit what is this like for the individual with middling capacities, with the type of individual with the mind of awakening of the middle, so to say, which means that there is basically a difference of the extensiveness of the mind of awakening.
다 되네 다 지우 침벽이 남라 마 텔라테 된데라 되네 디요레 장주쇼도 셈게바 되니 대곰바 는 되게 합잘라라바스 되니 바드제 숨바데 되게 합잘라라바스.
And then we come towards the verses that speak about the type of individual with great capacities, and this point will be explained in 3 sub-points, in 3 sections. And the first section is the generating of bodhicitta, then it is the familiarizing oneself with bodhicitta, and the third point is to train the advices connected with the path of the great mind of awakening.
대인들한테 당부때 전적에 숨기 받으러 또 세계 주지들의 도매 돈에 달아져야지 마다나 만원 돈을 란디 지시자 대지 타이심지 다시 전 춥심기였을라네스 어때.
So the first point that is explained is the generating of bodhicitta. So we read verse 10. All my mothers who since beginningless time have loved me are exposed to suffering. What use is it if I alone am happy? So generating bodhicitta to liberate all beings from suffering, this is what bodhisattvas do.
다디 알란서 용다 티보 침벽에 심지 계단대랑 레로와 대야조 만주로 남게 타더니 베심지 담지 담불로 자야데 답대주티 만에로 장구요래 텐데 심지 담지 만마주 버치자면도 대 동한요나 란 대화를 대바티 룽구 말에 텐데 드니 말한소 제 마라 드네 자고에도 심지 담지라 드네 자기 인함베게 대 장주초도 토끼야데 다 티보 침벽 심지 대다 말한소 용수다고 되래.
What we just read is really the general generation of bodhicitta in the Mahayana sense. So this is how we generate it. And therefore here it's talking about all beings who have been my mother. This is something that is mentioned in the Mahayana bodhicitta because it is said that it is the easiest to connect with all sentient beings, seeing them as having been all our mothers. And then we see how they are all in suffering, they're experiencing a lot of suffering, and what use or how could it be good if I'm the only one who is happy? What benefit does it have if I'm happy and everyone else is suffering? And therefore I'm going to try to repay the kindness towards all beings who have been my mothers. I'm going to try to repay the kindness that they have shown towards me.
디 책제때 생용라 된자신보 된대지래로 대점도 마세 당한소 타와도 탐진 진비게 공방 냠술랭겐게 냠렘바 예인지 라사웨나 된 냠렘바게 칭이로지 고로와 디 칭이바데 디 책제되게 칭이 촌토와지 고고요래.
These are just a very few words, but they are showing an extremely profound and vast meaning. So because what is said in these few lines is really showing the qualities that somebody who aims for liberation and full awakening should possess.
인데 가야스나 먼저 초직네 지 냠렘바 인생이 망부 여러와 어떤서 냠렘바 마음지에게 미유도데 즉 산지지 공부 토비아 찾아 진부 된 또야 조버 진부 된 또야 다 디나시기 코르데 예메다 알아서 사겨로 코르데 예메 알아서비게 다 근데 따와 디 또야 디 나나기 내가 소인 삼베게 삼노 땅주데 데라 조 송구이로 뭐마치나 디게 차고 여러에서나 대sam기 차고 요 말이야 가연서는 알아서 탑 닌제 첨부 시럽 아니 다 찾아 첨부 있나 다 조진이 냠래 간데로 지나 차조기 냠래 디소 데카스나 셴드랑 게 체도 두고요 셴드게 삼버튼 메스 차위 쇼골라 조바 첨부당 드니 찾아 첨부게 따와 같이 뭐고 같이 첨부 라바이나 다티 테메게 따와랑 도르고요 레마도 대화 첨부 심비에 되게 나라 잔이 추고요 말이야 대엔데 다다 치제 데라 삼노타네 스트로와 심제 탐제 라 잠바다 닝지도 쪼실라 샤네 드니 제 산지지 공방 대야 직탑 라미기 주니 연구연하다 된데마베 도파신 티피키 놓기 냠내니 가리 연구여 베나 간다 된데로 질렀더니 연구를 마도 드니 제셰 게까진 돼야 된데 짠네 메발라 드니 직 티보 침비게 다상하게 남주 가지라고 가지 signiam bolabena 되네 버리디
You know, we can say that on one hand side, we can really say that there are many practitioners, there are many Buddhist practitioners who aim for Buddhahood, who aspire Buddhahood. And then they think, or we think, that I'm practicing Mahamudra, or maybe I'm practicing Dzogchen, or maybe I am practicing the inseparability in the Sakya tradition of samsara and nirvana, and I'm aiming for realizing this. This is my aim, to realize this view, the view of Mahamudra, of Dzogchen, and so on and so forth. And we hold this as our highest goal and aim and path. And that alone actually does not really make us a practitioner of that path. Because whether it's Mahamudra that we aspire to achieve, or that we practice, or Dzogchen, or we're in the Sakya tradition, whatever it is, all of these paths have to rely mainly on benefiting others. That really is the basis for any such practice, for any such path. If we don't have that, this aspiration, the foundation that is rooted in the wish to benefit beings, to benefit all beings, then we can even practice all the Mahamudra we want, but it will still be a practice that belongs to the Hinayana, to the lesser vehicle, not to the Mahayana. Because we really have to have the foundation, the ground of loving kindness and compassion for sentient beings. This is the foundation, the basis on which we build, we walk upon on this path. And then it doesn't matter, you know, how you build this foundation. If you build it inside the Mahayana tradition, or if you build it from Vajrayana teachings directly from your guru, that doesn't matter. But if this foundation is missing, then you can, you know, listen to all the nice and elevated Vajrayana teachings, but they are not gonna have deep, real meaning, because we have to have this ground beneath our feet, the ground that is oriented towards benefiting all sentient beings, that is based on loving kindness and compassion for all beings. That's
당 알아서 페나 다다 얘기를 납돼야 돼 어때나 인 삼삼도 요래 아직 근데 인 초벌했어 당 알아서 코랑 슝 코랑 게또당 차자 침부 코란게 조당 조바 침부 코란게 조당도 제바이나 띵하나서 톱자 다 차자 침부 있는다 조바 침부 있는다 다 공방 간데 제바이나야 텔라 쿠키 남샤시야 요리
Ku.
구 추구 롱구 뚜구 스지네 네 꾸니게 남샤다 스난다 꾸숨기 남샤 티 꾸숨다 꾸니게 남샤 짠네 메나 tene 공방세야 되다 조바 첨보다 차자 신변 남샤테 용구 코나 용답 요 말해. 그러? 대도 꾸니게 남샤시고나 대 인지 민지 니 심진 신도게 사본지 고고 요래.
Ku sapungores.
꾸 고고 요나 신도게 삼바지 고고 요래. 신도게 삼바 짠 메발로 꾸싱이 용구 말해라. 꾸싱이 메서나 tene 저부 세야 되다 메로. 대도 네츠 던조라 때네 다 맞아 전주기 샘기에 써야 돼. 딱 맞아 저부 타거나 토백이 주대 대가라는 차 내대요.
And it might be, that you hear me talking here about this and you go like, yeah, yeah, right, yeah, of course. Rinpoche things like that. Maybe it's true. It sounds good. But then if you actually look at the text themselves, if you look at the scriptures of Mahamudra or Dzogchen, and you will see that they are speaking about the result that is attaining the kaya. Sometimes there is mention of 2 kayas, or there's the mention of 3 kayas, the Dharma kaya, Sambhoga kaya, and Nirmana kaya. Mahamudra and Dzogchen, they are not achieved without obtaining these kayas, these enlightenment bodies. So if you want to achieve these kayas, these enlightenment bodies, whether it's the 2 or the 3, based on how they are presented in numbers, the meaning is still the same. If you want to attain these bodies, then you have to have the intention inside of you of benefiting sentient beings. That must be there, that intention, that motivation. Because if you want to achieve a certain result, in that case, the result of the kayas, then you also need to practice the cause that leads to obtaining these kayas. So the causes of what wants to be achieved, they need to be already there on the path. Otherwise, you cannot achieve a certain result.
이인데 당연한서 저 제 고긴 남샤 간데로 지인바이나 참나 그 심지기 나도 내고에 계신 분이라서
So whatever is your aim within this frame, if you want to attain these enlightenment bodies, the kayas, then you need to be anchored in bodhicitta.
되니 다 sabjiniba janju sem combatero janju sem combat te combat te dela ani kunsobke thoni nyamli nang da jeta dendamge simjige thoni nyamli nang da ni yori tena ne kunsob ke changsem komdan dela ya nyamsha ge kabla nyamden nang da jeta ani chutop ke thoni ani nyamden nang da de ani yung yori tera.
And then we move on to the next verse, which is the familiarizing or really meditating training in bodhicitta. So here there are 2 practices that are the practice of training the conventional bodhicitta and training in the ultimate bodhicitta. And when we talk about conventional bodhicitta, once again, there are 2 phases of training conventional bodhicitta. One is during meditation, and then one is after your meditation.
Adinane dambo nyamshagi kapsu kunzup ke kunzup tembege gone tati janju ki tsimrimbachi gombayina tena nyamshagi kapla tati tsikhi chukji tere donga maru tati duli chung zobe sanji shenpen semle chung dejin tati shenji donga da yangda jawa kyasi lari tati tsikhi tena yore.
The next verse, verse 11, is the verse that speaks about the cultivating of relative bodhicitta in meditation. We will read that verse. All suffering arises from seeking our own happiness. Perfect Buddhahood arises from the wish to help others. Exchanging your own happiness for others' suffering. This is what bodhisattvas do.
디 기념년 조데 카레스나 다신 제외기 냠내레 다 가나서 티보 침부기 군속의 찬이 냠내 가능방이나 다신 제외기 냠내랑 기 돈에 난고야도 계신 것이라래 디나네 짜와니게 짜와다고 다 디차도 요래.
So this is really the key aspect of the practice of conventional bodhicitta. This is the root practice for conventional bodhicitta, the one that is mentioned here, which is exchanging normally they just say exchanging oneself for others, and here in the text it says exchanging your own happiness for others' suffering. So this exchanging oneself for others, that's the root practice in conventional bodhicitta.
디인데 ngaranzo kadam 게 주주여로 kadam 게 주주기 냠낸다고 강 차고서나 로종기 냠낸 차고요. 로종기 자와 냠낸데 강하나 토되어서 다시 제외기 냠낸하나 토고인데 다디 측제때 알아서 초직는 삼모 땅바이나 알아서 kadam 버튼 저기 제 냠내게 자와도 마스나 뒤차되게 열라 아니 데이터 자와때 콘 넘버 속에 아니 덴데스 진에 샤샤부 마임바 오네게 년다 생라야 제 다신 제외기 냠내랑라 제 로종랑 더 템네 덴데 냠내난키 망부 시부지 열이 되는데 나 던져라 삼모 땅연도 삼바 오늘다 양다 제와 캐슬라니 인세 또 다신 제와 냠는데 뱀메스비게 좀 보시라래.
There is a lineage that's called Kadampa that originated in Tibet, a lineage, Kadampa. And in the Kadampa lineage, the main practice, one of the main practices is Lojong, the mind training. And the root of the Lojong practices, mind training, the most important practice here is exchanging one's own happiness for the suffering of others, as we have seen it here in verse 11. So here we actually see that root practice for them Kadampas in this verse. We find it in here. But this is something that not only they practice, but this is something that there have been so many practitioners of mind training that have practiced exactly what is said here day and night. And therefore, this is a very, very, very incredibly important practice, exchanging oneself for others.
근데 저다 녀망하기 겨선 안에 녀마 쇼사데 녀망하라 닝마기 기겐지요래 오늘 기겐 세다 넘버지요 되니 공개 쇼사데 데레 또 김부 직미 변소 조신기 라마 세타게다 템베 타고 들어 되니 공기 뒤준도 송기래 다신 제와 대파때 식대 배 디게슬라네게 시간 주지버데 파테데 식레 라오레데 에나 딩운네 체다 때만 냠는 진나바이 제토바이나 소속의 메시지라 주루와 슈shum부지 로고도스 데이터역이 냠네 주와 조바 마세 소소라나야 심바 찌부 차가지다 드니 운에게 신달에 펜버 주바이나야 운에 조투비기 네가 쳐버진 도스 다 데이터역이 다 운에 남은 냠용지기 송래 로 근데 코나야 괜히 직매 편조다 여기 라마 계신 주바 더바 된대기야 송이야 된대 망보지 송이야 바 된대 송구도
In the past, I have received the teachings on the 37 Bodhisattva practices by a Nyingma teacher, who is a very, very authentic and fine teacher. And he himself received the transmission and instructions for these teachings from the so-called Kempo Jigme Phuntsok, who some of you might heard of. He's a great Dzogchen master who is the great abbot of the Serta Monastic University in Tibet. And this teacher told me that, when we speak about exchanging oneself for others, the words are so easy. They are so easy these are very simple words. But to practice this really authentically is something that has such a huge impact on one's life, a really, really big impact in the sense that it will change our lives incredibly. And furthermore, that it increases happiness in the mind, in one's own mind. And also this practice and gives us practitioners really the power to benefit others. So these words really stem from this teacher who has a great deal of experience, and he heard these instructions also from his great teacher Khenpo Jigme Phuntsok. And they are not the only ones to say that, but many, many lamas with great experience have stated exactly this. That's
Pena ngaramso ta tudun kachama chinesiki nyamle. Yorwa ta di chinesiki nyamlen tela chi sen de chinesiki thobare. Chi ku komya de chinesiki ku kombare mato de nyimbo ki nyamlen te ta de ganan chati yore. De tsije de mesibe keshon bashire la de ngaramso duita namba kunto chi shindagi shenki tunga de rangi len toba chita. De rangi dewa de shina ter toba ngune ge chiga rewa da de toba ge zane chi kongda cheba. De ge tone ngune ge shensim rangi tembe tone chi shenla chi ninchi chuma mayi bichi yobayi na. Tene soso semla ngune dane ge dunga singe de zane yungu maari. Dunga de ya chi jungba ina ya de junga de shen ni jung de begi nyingji la tene jung begi dunga. De dunga de ge kaa yungu orsana shen dengi samba bemi lunji dhubi tone yungu ore. Ta tenzo la dunga sige maari shen dengi sige re. De yendu ta tenzo de ngune ngara soke ngune chi duida namba kundu chi yona soso lakpe ki nangla diri tsuktuba chi gogo yore.
Probably the practice of Chenrezi, the Chenrezi sadhana. In the Chenrezi sadhana, we do visualize, meditate on the form of Chenrezi, and that's what we imagine. But the meaning, what we are practicing, is exactly this. What is shown here in verse 11. So this verse 11 is really a very important verse. And when we practice this, when we really authentically practice to take the suffering of others upon ourselves and giving them our joy and happiness and letting them experience well-being and so forth, and imagining that you take upon yourself all the suffering of sentient beings, then if we practice it without any expectation of reward or anything in return, then we are truly practicing incredible, pure-hearted compassion. And when we do that, then we can be sure that we will not experience any suffering in our own mind. If we experience suffering when we do that, this practice really thoroughly and authentically, then that suffering that we will experience will actually be still connected to the wish of benefiting others. It will be a kind of maybe being touched from the heart of compassion that we carry spontaneously inside of us. So this is something that is really important to always have in your pocket, so to say. This is something that's really important to anchor in yourself, this practice.
Re te inde ngaranso ta zawe ta yaselani sunju soduma ki ningbo to ge nyamlen de ta de chag yore ro ta te inde ngaranso che kabre ta tatang ngaranso piti ki chag yo mare nyamti ji chag yore ro nyamti inde zane ngaranso nima chi gi na la pena 당 쇼게 쇼게 인한다도 다 가디 있나요? 뜻을 컴백업소 지금 당보 셈진비 롱로 여러와 롱로
Re-
롱로 롱로 된소래야 mikpa sonne dashi gewe ki nyamle na ya pene ya long yang ngo byendu ni shenge dongha de ya ngo ba ta ni rangi ma chi long ma sa yendu samba ten rangi dewa tamji shen la tegbe na wa ten su pa ten de chi 저 char dangbo tengur chik da su su ke 제 답 대화든 소리야 되네 대 말마 따야 다든도 난도나 믹스기 엔도 자좀 보지요.
So this practice that is shown in verse 11, that really is the heart of the whole 37 practices of a bodhisattva. That really is the most essential and important practice of the whole text. And this is a text that is not just, a text that is here to convey intellectual reflection points, but it is a text that's really coming out of experience and based and focusing towards us generating experience. So we should really apply this and put it inside our daily lives, into our practice. So for example, if you practice in the morning, or you can do this in the morning when you have time, and what you do is you connect this practice to the breath. You link it to the breath, to so-called breath cycles, so to the inhale and the exhale. And how does that work? So when you inhale, you imagine that you take upon yourself and you take away from sentient beings all their suffering. And when you exhale, you imagine that all the joy, the well-being, the causes of true happiness become that you are giving these two sentient beings, that they are receiving them, that you are giving them. And with each breath cycle, you repeat that same imagination, that same aspiration, and then you can do a whole mala, so you can count, each breath cycle with your mala. Or of course, if that's too much or too long, then you can do it 3 times, or you can do it 7 times, or 21 times in a row. And then over time, you can increase the time span when it becomes more easy and you're more familiar with the practice.
드니 찌데 가능스나 데 가브레 튀행기 값소 양 mikpa 섭 게 마종바이나야 양데 게 심지게 칙데 여러 심지게 칙데 양의 양도 마조려라 소바 근데 나와이나 양 펜도 충분히
And sometimes also when you are practicing and in your meditation session, maybe your focus, your visualization gets, a little bit blurry, you are losing focus, then at that time you can just go back to the verses of bodhicitta and repeat them over and over again.
제당하면서 제 많이 되야라 소와 때 디나신게 심지 남과다년 심지 탐지게도 당에 심지 탐지가 펜버 쇼선 베게던데 심지 된소 여러와 디 되다 넘버 군토치 칸네 마조주 여바치다 메셴게 암출로 투주 여바 된데지 정바이나야 셴라 미테 상보치다 메시 티니지 소소랑라야 곰시 아버지 태베야지 근데 연구요래 빼나 차스나 말아서 벽화와 간직이 좋은데 지 최대진진 신인스기 요래라 지 견데 셰마고 바지 심바 미자포뇨 아마타오지 있나야 지심지 상보지 칸에 된데 양내 양도 쪼는데 내가라서 아니 부모 춘중 등사 암줄람 뒤다 남보고도 투고 요래 투네 셈로 주라도고 요래 셈로 주라도는 데갑소 다 된데기 기행게 신 라소바 탐질라 지 고육이 나래 가이나 지부제다 아니 셈로 대화직 된데 용톱이 열대인데 다 된데게 아니 알아서 레가도 지 레가스나 수족의 방식 상부지 잡토나 팅알아서 좁으면 뭐 고육 등소에 변도 자신 뭐 열어요 니 대삼도 마세 이게 지알라서 봐 열어와 아주 배도이나 아니 돌아 remoki 그야 저다 되는 신기 아니 다 근데 망부티야라 소바 근데 연구요래 근데 연구 되게 팽거요래로 수수 믿은 저 나와 줘야 근데 난 돈을 야고요래
And it can also be a very, very important or beneficial practice to recite the Mani mantra, which means the 6-syllable mantra of Chenrezi, or to recite the formula of bodhicitta, may I realize Buddhahood for the benefit of all beings, to really speak it out loudly, even in your daily lives when you are surrounded with other people, because that will actually make them hear you as you speak these words, and you will have two benefits from this. One is that people will actually might get inspired by you, that you become an example for them to inspire them, and then also that you are actually generating the habit and strengthening the habit inside of yourself connected to these practices. And you all know that Tibet is a place where they say it's anchored in the Buddhist faith. And in fact, in Tibet, you find, or Tibetans in general, you find many people, not only people of ordained sanghas like monks and nuns, but also just lay people, mothers or children or adults, who are actually reciting constantly the mantra of Chenrezi or the formula of bodhicitta. And that has a huge effect on the children then, or the other people, especially also the children that who hear it with their ears, what these adults are reciting. And that in turn really transforms their mind and leaves an impact in their minds. And that again will have a huge impact also on the environment. Even the nature itself can be affected by the frequency and energy of these wishes and mantras. And also our own mind will more and more become a joyful and happy mind. And if we really therefore create such an imprint or habit inside of us, then we ourselves benefit greatly from it. We become more and more happy, and also the surrounding, the environment, nature becomes positively affected by that. And you can even, in your daily lives, take time to draw the syllables of the mantra of Chenrezi, for example, on paper or stones, or wherever, like just painting or drawing these syllables, like you have seen it in Tibet. There is a huge tradition of doing that, of painting the mantra syllables on stones, and then people will see it, and that's very beneficial both for them seeing, but also beautiful practice for yourself.
라서 되니 다 지톱기 kopsare 되니 지톱기 냠nen젤라 지톱기 냠nen데 쫄 람치르기 냠nen데 차데 요래 되니 람치데라 담보 마니 발람도 키어와스 레 마니 발람도 키어와스 데라 쇠다 되신 왕기 다기 노 담제 초감 초도 주나야 르단 롱주 되숨 게와는 데라 홍와 캐슬라레스.
And then we move on to verse 12, which now is the verse entitled of belonging to the section transforming loss, taking loss onto the path. And we are here entering into the practice of relative bodhicitta in the post meditation, which is all these practices that are then labeled as taking onto the path something. So here we are taking onto the path loss, and reading verse 12, it is the following: even if someone in their acquisitiveness were to steal all your worldly possessions, or incite another person to do so, making over everything to him, body, belongings, and all your merit from past, present, and future. This is what bodhisattvas do.
다 된데 다 지당 안서 람제데 배 메시베 계신 것이 차대요. 동아 람도 채워 대화지 중반에 람도 케토바지 고고 여레마도 땅 하나 좀 냠샤게 갑들라 마차 드리드요. 지당 하나 좀 미수다지 레당고 바타올라 냠샤게 갑라 마차 제라 강이에요 말에. 다 강에 치슈데 가도 차이게서나 제토기 갑을 트요래. 제토도 가르서나 냠레 마제베갑 곰마자베갑 튠 마송베갑 딘데기 갑데라 제토 차위요래. 근데 데이터에 갑랑하는 좀 미순다고 지나야다 냠레 추신도 제약을 가고 연구를 간스는 냠레 제베갑소라 더미세 소소로 바시 진행요 말에라 소소 다 진내 윈발랑 주부 되어요. 제 제도부 값은 알아서다 빈자레 나응기레 되니 데멘베게 레가기 된다레 가와이 이나야 도고도 되니 초솔롱야게 닌가도 슈충부 연구요라와 이 초솔롱 사회 쉬고라 되니 소소게 냠렌 티피 타고 연구요 말해 아니 대기 값라 되니 냠레 간den난 고요 다음에 된소 대기 걸 데이터다 되는 시기요래.
So this is a really important section that we are going to go through, because this is the section on taking onto the path the occurrings, events of the phase of post-meditation. This is extremely important, taking onto the path the different things that can happen to us when we are not sitting on our meditation cushion and meditating. So for most of us, sitting in meditation, that's not really a big struggle. But when we come out of the meditation, when we are not anymore in the official, sitting on the cushion by ourselves, nobody's disturbing us, and we are not meditating, we go out, we resume our daily activities, then for most of us, actually for all of us, it's very difficult to upkeep our practice really nicely and purely. Because when we are sitting there on our meditation cushion, maybe we are in a very secluded, quiet place. Of course, there's nobody to disturb us, and the practice will be very nice and can be very, very, smooth. But once we resume with our daily activities, then there is work, then there is the family, then there are the parent, the children, and so on and so forth. There is a huge danger at that time to fall into any kind of extreme. And therefore, at that time, it's extremely difficult also to upkeep the practice fully or without mistakes.
제 다들 값을 가르스나 배는 소속인 매체 나라야 제 직신 다 데이터다 내가 수틀가 다게 너 담주 초감 초도 주나 네 총얘기 강사 되라야 아니 제 ingö부터 파 짐바 땅 마세베 소속이다 뒤숨도 사베 개와 된소야 파다 짐바 땅지 뭐와 개와라 소바 탐지 나 제고레스 다디 초진에 갈래 가고 쉬우지래 장치기 셈을 보지 야부지 공만 신기지에나 대 쉬우기 갈래 가보지래 대인도 어쨌든 저기 메시지 나라 야밤게 남샤 용기래 대다 아니 되게 양 제라야 서브젝트 하시지 용기래로 진짜 라스바 용기래 얘나야 다 진짜 내가 소 아주 산노 땅초직 계단직 야부지 계토나 때니 소소라 제 동해 여바이나야 동아 대양 제주와 전에 때니 양지가 대 동아 대 계획을 조토야지 단 대외경을 조토야 된대야 연구요.
We hear in verse 12, we have such an example of what can happen to us. So, for example, we have a thief come to our house or wherever, and they are just stealing all our belongings and wealth. And the text here is saying that if that happens, you should not only let them take all what they have stolen from you, but do also dedicate to them, send them all the virtue that you have accumulated in all the 3 times, and also dedicate for them, make dedications for them. And this is something that's extremely difficult, especially if our bodhicitta is not really, really strong. It's very difficult to do that. And it is also very normal that in life, things will happen that will make us either lose or win. There's always this dichotomy between victory and loss. And therefore, there will be many more lines that follow up from here onwards that will present more and more of these kind of situations. And however, if we can have the right mental setup, then we can, when we experience hardship or difficulty or suffering, we can actually transform it into something virtuous.
맨날 알아서 초진의 섬을 당당으로 지잖아. 알아서다 라마 지우 침부돼서 공부 속이라. 공부 줘봐당. 테니스 알아서 다 조든서 정박이 제 동화지 여러 동화니 자기 말에 라마 든서 공부 줘야는데 가서 스스로 동화 지 자외 전에 동화 저인 발라 조 가를 했으나 라마의 동화이 알아서 기기 말에 라 라마라는 동화 기기 말에 동화 기해야 돼 소소의 동화 기기래 라니 라마 라테 라마다 카드라송스 라니 강쇼르다 라마 전에 거주 슈토마송스 tattimantetra 이렇게 동화대 연구요래. shen tunzu tawaina 동화대 라한다 신이가 같은 걸 팔아야 동가 권한서 동화요래. 동화기 돈에 공부져서 닝제 신의 삼도 다야지다. 네 소수 네 권한속에 소소라 대화 가서 원념도 요디 컴퍼니스로 인지게다. 근데 지혜도 그랬다. 달리 권한속 매바차선스 다 디라테네 소소랑라 지 로바 징임에도 되게 동화라서 같은 연구요래. 진짜 존나 지바이나야 동화 용당의 돈이 제발 연구하러 와. 배대나시 제 초점 제바이나야 수수 삼모 당당치 제발 용스나 이거야 그 안용와 대한 가가지 연구를.
So there's one example for just the fact that sometimes there can be very different ways of viewing things or perceiving things based on how the outlook that we have, the setup that we have mentally. So for example, if a great lama dies and if our friends die, that's a very different experience, both ways, on both sides. So if a great lama dies, that lama in the moment of death does not have suffering. For them, death is not a moment of suffering. And then for us who are left behind as disciples, for sure there will be some suffering, but it is not that we are worried about the lama or that we are, oh, poor lama who died. We are mainly suffering ourselves because we have lost the lama. We are, of course, we are left without a teacher then, and we might be sad that we cannot anymore ask them questions or things like that. And then if a friend dies, then that person, that friend who has died, they themselves are suffering through death, most likely. And we are suffering because they are suffering, because we are worried for them. Then we are suffering because we lost the company. Maybe we are suffering because we really lost a good friend who was a good, important support for us in our lives. So here, this is a completely different way of looking at a situation or perceiving a situation. And this is what happens with the Lojong practices, with mind training, that there is a completely different way of perceiving phenomena, of perceiving things.
이니 다 되게 지진이버데 제 동화람도 키워러 Dala nyeba chungse me shin to kanta dagi kor choji na ninje wangi te tikwa nam dala lemba kyasila le. Chidang tsawe chani maangcha chikpa redo tene nga kashi ma tuen sha yin rwa shakcha.
Also,
Tene DJ, tene kanshi dala minyin ha tsoba tongsun chaba dropa jena ya jamba simchila ya tene chi yunden joba kyasila le es. DJ, tene drama debi wusu kashi ki tsani drushi tsingi nana yang dela gewe shiji drushi ji goba doba gyasi lalins.
and then we are going to read the next 3 verses because they are very similar in wording. And here it's about, again, the aspect of bringing things onto the path. And with verse 13 and so forth, we see taking pain onto the path. So we're going to read the next 3 verses all in a row. Verse 13, even if person decapitates you, although you have committed no offense at all, summoning all your resources of compassion to take this negative act upon yourself, this is what bodhisattvas do. 14. Even if someone spread all kinds of slanders throughout a billion universes, responding by affectionately detailing that same person's good qualities, this is what bodhisattvas do. Even if someone humiliates and denigrates you in front of others, regarding him as a spiritual teacher and behaving differentially towards him, this is what bodhisattvas do.
Ati tsawe tagi tsigan shibu maancha te dunga lamdo khewa chanchang riro, minyen bata, tani kasabari me bata, tani tina shingi, ati tani rik tsongpegi me bache, 매버체 드니 미니엠버체 온다 슈브나시 네 동알다 된수 상마 지바레 망차 대인도 셴다 더드잖아 셴게 강중 제바이나 제도 쭉 로 랑게 갸카데 셴라테 셴게 안에 매버데 랑게 레 텐데지 종사의 슈글라 장주쌤 오네데 소소기 렌토바 종송바 이나로 동원도 동랭이 냠는데 뒤도 차위요래.
Tonglen.
동랭이 냠베. 가야스나 시행기 제 레와트도 저랑기 공투바 제로 렌이 공부지. 네 랑기 코난줄 젠도 때토바데 네 다신 제비 냠는 오마데 뒤도 차위요래.
So all of these verses here, they're pretty similar in the sense that we are taking upon us the suffering of this other that is harming us in whatever way, whether it's through hurting us, whether it's through blaming us or criticizing us. So what is the concept here behind the logic, so to say, of the bodhisattva practice is that they are doing it, we let them do whatever they do, and then we take upon ourselves the hurt, the suffering, and we offer the victory, everything positive, in other words. We take upon ourselves the blame, the slander of others. We take it upon ourselves and we imagine that they receive whatever they need, whatever they wish, whatever is really positive. So that is actually the real practice of Tonglen, of taking and giving, of exchanging oneself for others. This is the real practice that is connected to our cultivating of bodhicitta. So if we really are seriously practicing bodhicitta, then we have to do the practice of Tonglen, which means I exchange my own happiness for your suffering. I take your suffering, your defeat, your loss, your negative behavior upon me, and I give everything positive to you. Whatever you desire, whatever you need, all the roots of virtue, all the dedication, I give it all to you. So this is the real practice of taking and giving, or also named differently as exchanging oneself for others. That's what.
드니 다 되게 닝보도 냠는데 간데 지고래서로 닝보 제당 소소 랑라 데 소소 랑이 랑니 제버 젬바 여러와 게충부터 텐데직 당 드니 수수게 아니 라와 대가랑 나신 차베게 어 삼바 텐데도 슈충부지 용사회 슈글라로 티 미니베게 동하라 소버지 종바이나 티 람도 키아베 시우칼리 가보요.
So what's basically the essence, the essential practice that is happening within this frame of practice is that, you know, generally we are very, very attached to ourselves, very fixated on ourselves, considering ourselves as the most important person, and that we want things to come to manifest exactly how we want them to be. We want things to be the way how I want it. And if that is so, if we have this kind of mindset, then it becomes incredibly difficult to bring on the path experiences such as being blamed or criticized and so forth.
디엔데 마란조 베다와 샤웨나 소소게 마도라 탑 파타마 아니라 수 카딘 춤보이나 tat 테라 세와데 여바 타초바 제로 드니 마게 라라 니에바 당바이나야 이 모라 기 파이나다 마이나다 라라 니 가스오레 메드비기 담니엠바 라소바 라바이나 이 소수게 마데 카딘 춤보지 임바 하고 바치로 드니 딘데 셰데바들라 줌센지 요레 때야 줌센데 모라 카 메베톤에 따딘데 직삼삼 구마구야라 소바 또 제가 마이 구마구 말때 가시 된소 벤주기 강아 요도 소들이 삼삼 베난 주든 소리 주노든 소리야 구야로다 때야 준셔라 소바 된데 용구로 나나테네 근데 내가 소든 소소게 삼시 제로 마간데 좀 보인 대 아니 주제 단내 수지를 때네 뭐라 근데 제고 토버레마도 근데 제가 모랑이 가르쳐봐이나 야부이래 선배기 하나서 대 제사회제라 그냥 소소기 코난 쪽에 랭이 받아오다 측주바 라소바 가질라바이나 소소 게라 싫어 포그 말해 셈나야 동아시라 연구 말해 대인데 소소 말라 강 치우 차바이나 니칭이 벌었더니 모나선 버치우 차거든 대 샤워쇼 드네 지 레가 냠바 소소 랑라 지 쩌바 냠바라 소바 템바이나 디템바게 모라 치부 차고이나 데 모나 치부 차와쇼 모나 니게 카딘 자청분은 타바도 탐지 캠바 때마 토바이나야 데 딘데 라소베게 쩌바라 때네 모나 셈바 치부다 대부 차수나 데 되게 대한 고쳐바 쇼 선베게 다 딘데 지 마나 좀 마도라 삼탄 토부로가 데나신게 림베 심지 탐제라 장토나 시라게 하고 요래.
For example, let's look at a practical example. Let's look at our mothers. Let's say we have a kind mother, and we have our mother has for sure love for us, and she has been very dear to us. She has been very supportive and shown a lot of kindness towards us. And then let's imagine that at one point we have a situation with her where maybe she's, for whatever reason, either she's hurting us, maybe through words or something, or maybe she is doing something that's not so good. Maybe our mother is stealing something, or she's lying about something. It can always happen, especially. It's not now the case that all our mothers are likely to steal something, but sometimes it can be that we are in a situation where we just lack the basic material things, and therefore then our mother maybe starts to steal something, or she lies about something. But for us, having this loving connection with her, there is a basic understanding that we then will think that, okay, she's doing this because there is some kind of cause. There are certain causes and conditions that make her do that, even though it's maybe not the right or a good thing. She is still a good person. She's doing it because there's some kind of reason. Maybe the action is not great, but she has a reason to do that. So we are more understanding. We don't take it so personally. Maybe even she has said some words that are hurtful, but we don't take it so personally. We are not so much hurt or offended by it. And then we use that situation with this mindset where we are bringing things onto the path. We use the situation in a positive way where we then make a wish, for example, that okay, may she, through whatever she has done, may she achieve the happiness that she's searching for. May she be really happy. May she be fulfilled with whatever she yearns for. May she be happy and have the causes for happiness and so on. So here we start to train with our mothers, and that's an example because that's more easy. We have a more connective sense towards her, but then slowly more and more we start to train the same mindset with more and more beings. So we make our bodhicitta, our field of bodhicitta, wider and wider and wider. That's a very good way. Lasso? Okay. So we will stop here today.
Tata chida maan chewa nangba yinba nangba rerwa. Tendu ngaranzu che nyamlen tenzu maan chewa nangi yore la teni bar la ngaranzu ta jetop ki lamche ki kap tenzu ki kap tala ya che ta taki shungne yongba nanshi susu te yonglu yongdan de ya susu nangni yonggu yon nanda chiso la teni yonggu yon nanda kante chini yonggu yoba yana ta ngone susu chi mi sangbu yinda min dina shingi nyamlen pa ngoma reta me se ke ta ngone tse rao songsa rao de ta didi hagu go re rawa lam jetop ki kap ki nyamlen ki kap nyamlen se na ta dinde ki ken trebe kap so hagu go re.
So most of us here are Buddhists and most of us here are practitioners, and the post meditation, the point when we get involved again with the activities of our daily lives, whether it's in being inside of society or things inside our family, these situations, however we then react and behave towards what comes by being in contact with life, that's really going to be a measure for our practice. That will help us to measure and see where we are at in our practice, whether we are really progressing or not.
Mananzu tambeji yore rawa upa yama tu trai tu umo mai ma tu name tu se ki tsigi yore ka la warsa na susu pa ki susu ki buddhi ta zingu juna pe kheba resa na pa ki lawa tsam ki pengi ma re mama chupa shu de kodo tradi ki pa churangi buddhi ngone ngenpa tu sine ragi mama laba ina ta mama ku mi ngenpa yinpi ta re ngarpa yinpi ta re maa ki susu ki pumo de namba yabu to shine lawa ki ane pumo namba yabu yinpa hagu ma re ngoma tachi makpa degi ta zebu tu laba ina tati duyu chagi res ngoma zebu yoda me tusa la tuyon do dini geja yungure ma to susu ki resam de abatam ki pengi ma re.
So there's an idiom, a saying in Tibet that says, if the father praises his own son, saying, "Oh, he's such an intelligent child," that doesn't mean much. If an enemy says something about the son, let's say somebody who has had a conflict with this person in the interaction, and the enemy or the person on the other side says this is actually not a good person, then you might rather trust more the enemy. They will have probably more truth in their own hands. If in the same way, if a mother says, oh, my daughter is the most beautiful one, that doesn't have much weight. But if she then gets a husband and the husband is really, you know, a cool guy, then we can say, okay, she really is a beauty. Then we can, so just to say that, you know, it depends on you know, the facts also, and in interaction, what's true and what's not. There you can really measure things objectively.
대인데 알아서야 냠내게 갑들 냠내 차쟁이 냠내 갑라 근데 쉐드여레 알아서 남주 냠내 지대고서 똑바데 가게로 똑바데 매봐 남도데 아 방야게 탑시라 남도 가야게 탑시 방부지요래 뭐만 남줄 바지라 똑바데 고고요래 똑바 매봐라 대 냠내 제용해요 말이 되는데 남주 바 되게 똑바 강마마 걔도 주네더니 냠내 다 자기도 잘면다 되게 따고요 베데나시 장주 선배가 냠는데 오늘 야구 차기도 차기면도 세대 아니 람게 갑들라 야징이 아니 체마테 던조라 라레도 그래 징이 체바 정바이나 내가 안서 섬지 땅네 땅원에 된 그거 상보제도 되는데 땅아 저 야구차도 뭐 제고도 지내다 되게 갑다 하나도 돼아 제 냠내 포도 정보 차수나 때문에 야구 요리
And so there's another saying in the concerning the Mahamudra practice, that when you are practicing Mahamudra, then you are training in removing discursive thoughts. But in order to train in that, it means that you need a lot of discursive thoughts. You need a lot of thinking. Otherwise, you cannot train in removing them. So you can actually only really see if somebody is a good yogi if they really have a lot of thoughts in their Mahamudra practice and manage to remove them very nicely. So there needs to be a lot of disturbance, so to see if you are actually successful with your practice. And the same is also inside the Mahamudra practice. It is said that if you actually see if you are progressing with your practice, the moment you are meeting with difficulties. So then you can really see how is your reaction to the disturbance that is occurring, and then you can really see whether you are progressing or not, and then you can also, based on that, measure your progress, and eventually see that you have to practice more. All right, so then let's close here.
Sunamdi tamje sepani tamneni be donapa chigana chembalo chubai sebe zole ndo sho jambalpo chedra chembada kundo sambo teyan deshende deda kunje jeso ndar kewa deda tamje abdo no changsho sencho rimbo maji bana chenche che ban nyamba meba gone gondo pelo wala sho